We're dealing with this, this monster, this predator, this black snake that's coming to devour our community, pollute the water, destroy nature, make our people unhealthy.
Standing Rock, North Dakota is the epicenter of the attempt to save the ecosystem from the fossil fuel industry. I came here to listen to the frontline voices of those in this fight, led by indigenous communities, and to offer up their example of nonviolent protest for all who intend to resist.
This whole entire area that we're on is a floodplain. And so that's kind of scary. We're not really sure what the Cannonball River is going to do over here as winter progresses and ensues, because even you feel the little chill in the air here. Yeah. Well, it's not even winter yet.
Candy Mossett, an indigenous rights activist from the Mandan, Hidatsa, Arikara Nation in North Dakota, has been here at the Standing Rock encampment in Cannonball since August.
Up until about 2-3 weeks ago, I had my 3-year-old with me. But just due to a lot of crazy things, there was a fire that was started across from the camp, burned 400 acres. Snipers running out in the hills out here. We can look in our telescopes and see them with their guns. Just a lot of the weather. So she's actually with my mom and my sisters. People have been out here for a really long time, since April 1st, and just a handful, 5 people. At the time, probably 30 people was like the swelling of the camp.
And now, 8 months later, that tiny group of water protectors has swelled to the thousands, including Native Americans representing more than 200 tribes, as well as non-Native people who are here in solidarity. The water protectors are attempting to halt the final portion of the $3.8 billion Dakota Access Pipeline that is designed to carry oil from North Dakota's Bakken oil fields through South Dakota, Iowa, and into Illinois. The 30-inch pipe will be able to transport as much as 570,000 barrels of hydrofracked crude oil a day. It is slated to run under the Missouri River, the main water source for the Standing Rock Sioux tribe. The frequent breaks and ruptures of pipelines, some 500 accidents a year, have raised concerns among local communities and environmentalists about the impact on air, water, wildlife, and farming. Native American communities say the pipeline desecrates sacred land and burial sites. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers said last week that it needed more time to evaluate whether the pipeline should continue along its proposed route. Dakota Access, however, has yet to cease work on the pipeline, leading some to speculate that it may defy the Army Corps of Engineers and pay fines or penalties.
The importance of this encampment at Standing Rock is not just that it is confronting environmental destruction caused by a pipeline carrying Bakken crude oil, but that it has become, for many, a model of resistance that will be replicated throughout the United States, especially under a Trump presidency, against the hegemonic power of corporations and a democratic system that has become too anemic to carry out reforms, especially environmental reforms, that will protect the planet.
The encampment is north of the Sioux Tribe Standing Rock Reservation. Water protectors say the land belongs to the tribe, something state and pipeline officials dispute. But land disputes, given the 400 treaties the U.S. government made and then broke with Native communities, is nothing new.
It's not just what's happening since April. It's go back, to 1944, and then go back even before that when we were put on reservations. Go back to the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851 and 1868, in which the Standing Rock Sioux tribe never gave away this land. Never did. That's why right now we're on unceded treaty territory. The Cannonball River, just south of us, marks the government line for the reservation. So technically we're not on the reservation, but the Constitution and the government is recognizing that, we actually have treaty rights still. Even though they've been violated in the past, we have that in a court of law.
The first encampment was established on private land in April. It expanded to 2 more camps north and south of Cannonball River. A 4th was constructed on privately owned land that Dakota Access purchased for $14 million. On October 27th, police violently cleared water protectors from that site. Josue with the Indigenous Rights Network took me up the road from the encampment to the barricade on Backwater Bridge that would be the scene of violent clashes last Sunday night.
There was construction going on
on the pipeline.
Yeah, coming from that side of the 1806 highway, and they didn't start working over here. So then they said, we're gonna, the people here at the Church of Camp said, we're gonna exercise our right to be on treaty land, the Fort Laramie Treaty, and we're gonna take over this land.
Now am I right that it's basically 400 feet? Is that correct?
Yeah.
So once they finish that 400 feet, the pipeline is done, right?
Well, yeah, so the pipeline goes all the way to the river, which goes, the Missouri River's over there, and they cannot go under the river right now. That's
what they're waiting for the permit on.
Yeah,
right.
And the Army Corps 2 days ago just said, look, like don't drill until we do, we further do investigation on how it's going to affect the ecosystems. But that's kind of tricky because Dakota Access Pipeline basically said, like, well, we might just do it and
pay the fine.
And pay the fine, which is usually what happens with corporations,
right,
I think.
Right.
They don't mind paying the fine. Their whole plan was to, before the 26th, they would stop construction on this side. That's kind of where the first standoff happened, when the first people got arrested. So they decided, okay, we're not going to start working here. We're going to keep just doing our work over on that side. They just kept going. They kept going. Even though when President Obama said, hey, you guys should probably keep it 20 miles away from the river, they still kept going. And they got into 6 miles away from the river, which is right about there. And that's where they had the standoff, where the people say,
so
hey.
People moved up here to block the construction.
Yeah.
And explain what happened to this car here.
So basically what happened is people were holding space and holding their territory, and Morton County law enforcement basically said, we're going to move in, we're going to bring in the big guns, which they did, and we're going to move in. If you guys don't move, please move. And they held their space, they held, and then until they had a clash with the police, and a lot of things got on fire.
So when we came in, it was hard to get in. We were blocked at one point. They were in green uniforms from the National Park Service. Mm-hmm. Are they working overtime if they've been hired? Is usually that how it works?
I think so. I mean, what we experience is that we've seen constant, how can I say, like there's always a constant flow of law enforcement from different states and different counties coming in as higher,
right,
support, which a lot of the counties, for example, in Minneapolis, the county there were like, hey, one of the counties said, wait, we don't want to send our folks out there, pull them back. So they had to pull back because of pressure of their own community. So you do see this almost like militarization of the situation and, kind of escalating it, but then folks don't agree with it. They're in their own communities, they're like, hey, don't send our guys over there, like, we need them here.
Tell me why this pipeline is so dangerous.
Well, first, I think and foremost, it's a matter of protecting and really respecting what we stand on, which is the ground. As Native people, there is an understanding and a belief that we are part of everything. We have a saying called Mitaki Oyasin, which means we're all related. Everything is related. So when you think about, continue with this, process of extracting oil and really digging into Mother Earth, fracking, we need to move on from that as a form of respect for our Mother Earth. But let's walk. Let's walk. There's not a lot of emotion into them, which is very normal, I think, for law enforcement. But I think that when you think about it, it's like this water. If once the pipeline breaks, the water is going to go downstream, all the way down to 18 million people. So some of these folks probably have families downstream, So when they're disconnected from that, they also should be thinking about their families and their relatives, down south. And not just that, but on a human level, it's like it's a fellow human. Like, he's not your enemy. You're all in the same journey together.
But part of it is just preying upon economic desperation because of the poverty. I saw it in the coal fields of southern West Virginia. they would hire these kind of company goons who were from there. So their own communities were being destroyed, their water was being poisoned, sinkholes, and yet they were so desperate to get that salary from the mining company that they were actively involved in the destruction of their own community. And that is how these corporations prey on that poverty, which is happening here, I expect.
Yeah, and I think that's happening here, and that's what happens in native communities all over the world. I mean, in Latin America, it has, in Chile and Peru and Mexico, it has happened where your own people are the ones that are like beating you up because they want to get paid, like you said, from this multi-billion corporations. So,
well, that's, as we said before, that's how Sitting Bull is shot and killed by a member of Dakota, who were deputized into the Indian police force and paid something.
They're watching us, making sure that we're not trespassing or anything.
That's funny. They chained the trucks together.
Yes.
They did that after they burned.
They burned, yeah.
So they just use it as a barricade.
Completely. This is what they call the, which is also, a term that we don't try to use. They call it the front lines. Right. Because actually a lot of our veterans got offended when we call it the front lines because they say we've been in the front lines. Like we've been out there in the middle of other countries on the front line. This is not a front line. This is a complete form of intimidation, as opposed to, them being straightforward and, like even sitting and talking to people. It's just like a form of like, let's see how much we can mess with them until, like, there you go, there's a airplane. They have multiple airplanes that go on.
And they just circle.
They just circle. You'll see them. And when people are mobilizing, they really get a helicopter and the airplane, and they fly really low.
The day after we left the bridge was the scene of yet another violent confrontation with law enforcement and private security contractors. Not only were tear gas canisters and rubber bullets fired into the crowd, injuring 300 people, but the water cannons were apparently laced with pepper spray to coat the crowd that huddled in below freezing temperatures. One water protector's arm was ripped open by a canister and may have to be amputated.
Numerous, hundreds now, that have been sprayed in the face, shot with rubber bullets, attacked by dapple private security dogs. To me, it seems like it's going to take a really, really long time for them to go through the number of legal battles and court cases, but Energy Transfer Partners, it seems like what they want to do is just get the pipe in the ground and deal with whatever later.
This is Boom Bust, and these are the stories we are tracking for you today.
I think that the euro is severely undervalued.
That's the highest output in over 3 years.
What the Fed really wants is inflation.
The U.S. has more than doubled imports from Iraq.
All that debt that was accumulated, they have to pay it off.
And when you see oil go down, our economy goes down.
What do you make of that data, and what does it really mean for the average worker?
This right here, what we're in, is the Ocheti Shakowin camp, and so the Sacred Stone camp across the way has their own kitchen too. I think that right now there's probably about 7 kitchens.
I mean, that's quite an enterprise. That's quite a bit of food. I mean, this is a big operation.
And it's funny because when you're out here, you start getting used to, hey, I wonder if we should go to Hoopa tonight. Or, yeah, I heard they're making,
like a different restaurant.
Yeah, like, oh, I heard they're making enchiladas over here. So if you want to come over here with me, this is where people drop off donations, whatever it may be as far as food, tents, anything like that. And I'll just lift the flap for you so you can see all of the goods: toilet paper, toothpaste, deodorant.
The thousands of water protectors at Standing Rock, facing plunging temperatures, are winterizing the camp.
Explain to me why those American flags are upside down.
An upside down American flag is a sign of distress. And so we have been in distress out here ever since we've been attacked by the police and the military for simply saying, no, we do not want a pipeline underneath our drinking water source and on our unceded treaty territory.
This battle will escalate for water protectors such as Candy, under a Trump administration. She and her family live in the heart of the North Dakota Bakken oil fields. The impact on the air, water, and soil, coupled with the arrival of hundreds of oil workers housed in what are called man camps, has been catastrophic.
In many ways, this camp is a result of the battle you've been fighting for many years in the fracking fields.
Yes, yes. Since at least 2008, when fracking really hit my community, Fort Berthold, which is north of here in Newtown, North Dakota, and I would talk to people about fracking, and they would ask me, why was I talking about fracking? What does it have to do with Dakota Access Pipeline? So part of my work was to educate people about where the oil is coming from, which is in the fracking oil.
And explain, as you have to me in the past, what that fracking has done, not only to your community, but finally to you personally.
Well, that one's a tough one. Because it's been really devastating.
I know.
And so, I just get so emotional.
Okay.
It's just been really, it's just a complete change. It's a 180 from the little community I grew up in where you knew your neighbors and we borrowed a cup of sugar, you know. Walked around without fear as children, and it's not like that anymore. You can't leave your doors open. You can't walk around because, I mean, literally people try to kidnap our kids. Walking from home from the elementary school, and, you know, all these man camps sprang up all over our communities, violence against women.
They prey on women, right?
I live right on the Missouri River. It's just that there's a man-made reservoir as a result of the dam that's called Lake Sakakawea. And so you can see the rigs that surround the river. They're on top of the hills because we're near the Badlands, the North Dakota Badlands. So obviously, where does that stuff go when it overflows? It runs down into the rivers, into the streams. And in fact, in July of 2014, we had a huge, over 1 million gallon spill. And they did a study. Nothing is growing there, wherever that water touched. And they said there's arsenic and selenium and tellurium and like all these carcinogenic compounds sitting right on the surface that are beyond levels for human or animal consumption. And that's still just sitting there not cleaned up.
And the water, the river.
The river is over 4,000 miles long. It runs through the heartland of this country. One of the things people don't understand is that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers back in 1944 came up with this brainchild called the Flood Control Act, also known as the Pick-Sloan Act, because there was flooding happening in St. Louis and Missouri. Incidentally, that flooding was happening because the Army Corps of Engineers went in and removed the natural riparian water zones and were putting up, cement walls. So they were the reason that this flooding was occurring. And what they decided to do was come up into Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, and they built a series of dams. Each dam was below a reservation. So Garrison Dam created Lake Sakakawea. The dam down here created Lake Oahe, which those are now our drinking water sources. So there's another connection here with the Army Corps of Engineers and why we're saying do not allow this permit, because you forced us to have this reservoir as our drinking water in the first place, and now that's under threat of contamination because of all of the fracking. And so there's so much more to it than just in the here and now. It's this whole historical context about what we've been facing as natives in this country, basically since colonization happened. And what this movement is doing is forcing this country to take a good hard look at what it actually is founded upon in the roots, which is the taking of indigenous lands.
And are people fishing out of that river?
Oh my God, yes. I mean, North Dakota is a huge fossil fuel state, first of all. We have 7 coal-fired power plants here. So as a result of the 7 coal-fired power plants, every single bit over the 11,000 miles of rivers, lakes, and streams in North Dakota is already contaminated with mercury. We're seeing sores and pusses. So the Fish and Wildlife Service has been taking samples, and they are finding that there are like dissolved solids and things that are obviously in the fish as a result of the fracking chemicals going into the water. Growing up on the reservation here in North Dakota, it was normal to have people around me be sick all the time. And so when I was in college myself, I was 2 years into my undergrad program, and I got diagnosed with a stage 4 sarcoma tumor. And I remember the first thing my mom did was like break down crying, and I remember consoling her like everything's gonna be okay, because I really believed it. I really believed that, it was just something that I had to go through in my life. But I probably would have been a lot more scared if I had understood what that meant at the time. Most people that have a stage 4 sarcoma don't make it. It is just, it makes me question why sometimes, like, why am I still here when other people lost their battle, and it's just so unfair. And then that's why a big part of why I'm doing what I'm doing is to talk about what does environmental racism mean? What does environmental justice actually mean in climate justice? And our own people in our own communities didn't even understand the concept that we were unfairly and disproportionately targeted by the fossil fuel industry because we lacked the resources to push back. That's why you don't see these things in Hollywood.
Right. Or Bismarck.
Yeah, or in Bismarck, because even this pipeline was rerouted from just north of Bismarck, rerouted down to just north of Lake Oahe. You know, the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe's drinking source.
And one of the things you told me, the way they mask the cancer rates is that they don't measure it in your community.
Right.
They measure it in the place of treatment.
Right.
So we don't actually know how, there's no statistical data in these communities that will back up the points that you've made.
What I have is like 2 shoeboxes full of obituaries, and I can write on each of them when they died, well, the date is there, but what kind of cancer they died from. 2 shoeboxes full, and you know how thin a piece of paper is. Just from when I was little growing up, just from the people that I know, the funerals that I attended, not even extended family members. And so that's kind of the way that I've been able to use the information to put a face and a name to say this was so-and-so, this is what they died from. And maybe get some justice that way, instead of, you know, just being an ignored population. We've been through so much already by a government that literally had a termination era and tried to terminate us. Yeah. That's what's beautiful about this, is because we're still here.
And you're fighting back.
We're fighting and we're winning.
Yeah.
I mean, against all odds.
The water protectors here are not only seeking to save the purity of their own water, but remind us that life has an intrinsic value beyond a monetary value. And perhaps in many ways, that's the most important lesson the resistors here have to impart to the rest of us. That we must honor the sacred. We must finally see all forms of resistance as a battle to protect the sources of life itself.
I was born with resistance blood. We've always come from a long lineage of native people that's opposed colonization, and have always emphasized the need to be resilient.
Tom Goldtooth is a Native American environmental leader who fought the Keystone XL pipeline.
I see that there's a time for what we call the seventh generation, the seventh fire, when our young people are going to be stepping up, and that it's a time for us to see that the lifestyle that we have, that's been a lifestyle of separation from nature, a lifestyle of separation from that spiritual creative principle that is part of the natural laws, that people are going to start to come back to Mother Earth. And we see the signs already of where, for an example, an economic system that thrives on unlimited growth, that doesn't value that life cycles that we talk about as Native Indigenous peoples, that economic system is barely surviving right now on a thread. Yeah. It's called capitalism. And so that means that we need to look deep, not only as Native people within those teachings we have, but also we need to look deep as two-legged people of all cultures, as humanity, about defining and evaluating what our relationship is collectively with that sacredness of Mother Earth and Father Sky.
How do you handle a group this big with the kinds of obvious tensions that always come with collective action like this?
What we've been experiencing the past couple of months when this call of action went out is the challenges of the escalations of thousands of people who have come here. not only our native indigenous peoples, but a lot of the descendants of the settlers, the colonizers who come here. And it's very challenging. And within that is woven a lot of the social justice issues, a lot of the isms of civilization. As native indigenous people, one of the big issues that we're addressing right now as a symptom of colonization is it's called internalized oppression.
How does that manifest itself?
It manifests itself in some really frustrated, angry, unhealthy ways. It's kind of a love-hate relationship for the colonizer and with the colonizer.
And how, to give me examples.
An example of that is like, for an example, a tribal nation wanting to better itself economically. So it embraces an economic system that's based upon capitalism without giving us the freedom to be able to define what is economics to us. And then we start hiring consultants to help us. And those consultants generally are not our own native indigenous people. So it's the great white hope kind of a phenomenon. So I was part of that generation that kind of emerged from this fire that created a lot of toxic ashes, you could say.
Even activists bring white entitlement into this.
White privilege is very strong. Right. And that's not my responsibility. And that's why we need white allies. We need white friends who understand what we are talking about, because then it's their responsibility to work with their own to undo racism. It's a powerful instrument that is being used to divide people and to force us to work in silos. We've been very successful within our network and other pipeline battles by creating alignment and building bridges between white and native. And an example of that was the Cowboy-Indian Alliance that we utilized in winning this campaign against TransCanada Keystone XL pipeline. The white farmers and ranchers of Nebraska started to understand on how they can align themselves to the Indian rights issue, because we have the same concern as the protection of the water and creating a safe future, a healthy future for our children.
There's actually a midwifery yurt set up over there.
There's a midwife. Has anyone given birth?
One baby has been born in camp already.
Wow.
There's a vibration coming out from this encampment that's resonating through the skin of Mother Earth. It's a vibration that's going into the waters underneath the surface. The groundwater talks to each other. The aquifers talk to each other. That resonates throughout all people who have gathered here. And the animals and the birds are flying south now. They're taking everything that they're experiencing here in their travels in Canada. They know a lot. They're going to be talking to their other relatives of the bird nation in the south. So this messaging is going on.
This is the last battle in the struggle against colonization, not only of people, but of the earth. It is a battle indigenous communities have been fighting for over 4 centuries. And it is a battle that if they lose, we all lose. And if they win, we make possible life itself.